Good evening. We're just waiting for a quorum. I know there's a few councillors in the hall. We'll get them in here soon. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd ask those councillors please take your seat and sign in and turn your cell phones to silent or vibrate. Welcome to the budget meeting where we're going to be considering capital. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? Seeing none, we do have a presentation by staff. Ms. Chamberlain is there, welcome. Director of Financial Management and Planning, as well as Deputy Treasurer. for a presentation. Ms. Chamberlain, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight's presentation is intended to highlight the capital budget details as are provided on tonight's agenda in Report CSD 65-2017. The presentation will do a recap of the total submitted capital project budget overview, as well as an overview of the financing strategy that funds the 2018 program. We'll spend a fair bit of time talking about the alignment with the asset management plan, and then wrap up with a brief discussion on risks and opportunities and the next steps. There are a number of key themes that you'll see through the presentation, and so the key themes that we would like to ensure come forward are the fact that the 2018 capital budget is in fact balanced. There is adequate funding for the proposed $189 million capital program that's recommended for 2018. We're also addressing the needs to support the growth as per the Niagara 2041 study, and that includes all the foundational studies that went with that, the master plans and the development charge background study, etc. In March, Council approved the asset management plan, which was prepared with the assistance of our consultant, and you'll see that this capital forecast begins alignment with that asset management plan. And we've also identified how we're making progress with what we're referring to as our historical capital project backlog, but that essentially is our previous approvals that are multi-year projects. And it's important to take that into consideration as we look at the needs of the capital forecast and going forward, because we need to make sure that we position ourselves for success with the adequate staff capacity and financial resources, not only for the going forward projects, but also to deal with the projects that are underway. And some of these strategies will be there'll be opportunities to consider them with our operating budget. So some of the inputs to the budget this year, for the first time, we introduced the capital. We provided the standing committees with reports that included all of the proposed capital project business cases. It was a very coordinated effort with the finance team and the business leaders, and we hope it was a useful resource for council and helped to inform this meeting today. We've also leveraged the asset management plan, as you'll see as we move through the presentation. Additionally, the asset management plan identified some of the challenges with respect to water and wastewater funding. So we've taken some opportunities to enhance the education with regards to the current state of infrastructure at the Public Works Committee. We've made sure that we've aligned the capital forecast with the development charge background study, as well as with the master plans, the transportation and the water wastewater master plans. And as always, we are consulting with our external partners, the local municipalities, who cost share in some of the projects that are included in the budget. The total budget that's presented, it's $189 million, $189.1 million capital budget. This is lower than the $263 million that was presented at the standing committees, as that program could not be funded and represented a significant gap. So staff took away the information on the deferrals and present a $189 million budget, which includes about 185 capital projects. And to no surprise, the majority of that capital program is to fund the infrastructure related to water, wastewater, and transportation, being our traditional infrastructure. We're often asked, how does the capital budget support the sustainment of existing infrastructure? Well, if we break out that $189 million, you can see that approximately 49% is investment in the sustainment of our existing assets. And that investment of $92.7 million, unfortunately, when compared to what the asset management plan identified as the average annual rate of investment of $225 million, it does represent a funding gap of approximately $132 million. And I'll speak more to that as we move through the presentation. We also are investing 37% of the $189 million in service enhancements. These are service enhancements to existing assets as well as to some new assets, and we've just named a few on the slide. And lastly, 14% of the capital budget, $27 million, supports growth, which is progressing along the projects identified in the development charge background study, which on average are about $47 million per year. On the subject of growth, I think it's important to point out that historically, our average investment from the development charges has been about $15 million on average. The capital forecast is seeking to rely on approximately $54 million on average, and that is obviously subject to the availability of those development charge funds as we move forward. A few projects that we've highlighted here representing a gross budget of about $28 million. They'll facilitate growth of 84,000 people and jobs to 2041. Some of the other outcomes from the proposed capital program relate to the condition of our infrastructure. We've included the pavement condition index as well as the bridge condition that is greater than a good condition. And you can see that we're holding at our 61% on our bridge condition. We see a little bit of a deterioration on our pavement condition index, but still holding steady. With respect to our taxation metrics, our Standard & Poor's ratio, which is our debt to revenue, you'll see come up in the presentation, and we're still maintaining below our 60% target, and we're well below our annual repayment limit at 7.5%, which is well below the 25%. And we are progressing towards the $47 million per year average recommended investment from development charges. So again, as far as the financing strategy goes, the 2018 capital program is fully funded. And as a result of the constraints around the budget guidance, we are maintaining the same level of operating budget to support this capital program as was the case in 2017, so there's no increase. Although we are proposing that there is some debt that will be used for the rate programs versus the pay-as-you-go strategy that has historically been adopted for water and wastewater. We're recommending about $29 million worth of investment in water and wastewater infrastructure. That would be funded with about $1.7 million worth of debt charges. And we are recommending this strategy through a reduction in the transfer to reserve to be repurposed for the cost of the annual cost of servicing that debt. And the reason we're recommending that is we want to take advantage of this one-time solution to leverage the low interest rate environment, as well as we want to make some traction on the water wastewater infrastructure deficit. But even with this total of debt, we are still maintaining well below the 60% debt as a percentage of revenue. The two primary sources of financing for capital are reserves and debt. And as you can see, this chart provides a forecast of the reserve balances based on the capital forecast that has been submitted. Unfortunately, there's a significant reliance on the reserve balances, and we can see that over the course of the next 5 years, both the water and wastewater reserves are projected to decline to approximately zero, which is not ideal. As for the debt, we are seeing a modest increase in the debt, which is depicted by the stacked blue bars. But that debt is increasing very modestly because we're only taking on new debt to the extent that it is being offset by debt that is retiring. And as you can see from the red line, we're still well below the estimated debt ceiling of 60% of our revenues. So the 10-year capital forecast, it is a $2.4 billion forecast, which is very much in line with the recommended total program as per the asset management plan, which is about $2.2 million. However, you can see that for the next couple of years, we have a significant challenge, primarily due to the fact that as we rebalance the current year's priorities, we defer them into the next 2 years. So as we move through the program, we can see that we have a significant funding challenge. So what we're proposing is that although we have the 2018 budget reflecting some progress towards the asset management plan, staff is proposing that we bring back a revised forecast for the 9-year period that more effectively and realistically addresses our financial reality as well as the asset management plan. And this will help us ensure that we have the adequate staffing and financial resources to be able to support the capital program, as well as the current multi-year programs that are underway. And we've provided a little bit of a trend analysis here with respect to the multi-year projects that are on the books, and we can see that we have made some progress from 56% of the budget remaining at the end of Q2 to 34% this year. So we're coming along, but these are multi-year projects that do require significant staff support. A little bit more on the asset management plan. The total capital request, as I pointed out on the first slide, of $189 million, it includes about $92 million that's directly aligned with the asset management plan. And in comparison to the $225 recommended in the asset management plan per year, that does reflect a gap of about $133 million. So I provide for context, even if all of our regional available funding of about $143 million was dedicated to solely the sustainment of existing infrastructure and not to new infrastructure or our share of growth, we would still have a gap of about $82 million, which is very much in line with the gap represented in the asset management plan, which was about $73 million per year and dedicated or attributed primarily to the water and wastewater infrastructure. So to that end, we flag a couple of strategies and considerations for go forward with respect to the water and wastewater infrastructure gap. So as I noted, for 2018, we're recommending that we simply repurpose some of the reserves to debt, but this is a one-time strategy for 2018 and it's not sustainable. So some of the options that we can think about going forward, if, for example, we wanted to reach the average annual rate of investment over the next 10 years, but not address the backlog of infrastructure that exists, that would require us to invest each year 0 increase in water, but a 5.4% increase in wastewater. But if we actually wanted to address that backlog, the full backlog that is projected for the 10 years as per the asset management plan, that would require us to increase the water rates by 3.8% per year and the wastewater by 12.4% per year. And just another possible consideration is that just a 1% increase to the requisition each year would allow us to make some progress with respect to the gap, but certainly not take us in the full direction that we need to go with respect to the asset management plan, only improving the water investment by about 24% and the wastewater by about 6%. So in summary, there are a number of risks with this capital program, the number one priority would be alignment with the asset management plan, and we can see that we are not fully addressing the recommendations of the asset management plan in 2018 or going forward, and also that the increased use of debt while we continue to significantly rely on our reserves puts pressure on our net debt position, and this path could take us to doubling of our net debt by the year 2021. We also identify that the asset management plan relied on the fact that all regional funding was directed to asset management as an approximation, and we know that the financial strategy that we've identified, that's not a reality. As far as opportunities go, we'll continue to maximize our federal gas tax, and to the extent that we have funding, additional funding on the levy side of the budget, we can redirect federal gas tax to the water wastewater side of the budget, which we did this year, and we'll look to application-based grants to the extent possible. We're also proposing in the 2018 budget the sustainability review, which may provide an opportunity to repurpose some internal sources of funding and dedicate those to infrastructure funding. And certainly we would look to maximize regional sources of funding, including our development charges. So to wrap up, we are seeking, as per the report on the agenda tonight, to seek approval of the capital budget in principle, but the capital budget bylaw would then be approved concurrent with the operating budget bylaw on December 7th. We would look to update that capital forecast, as I indicated, for greater alignment with the asset management plan and our financial constraints. And then we would move on after our capital budget. The next area of priority is our water and waste management budget, beginning with a workshop on October 26th and our budget review committee on November 2nd. And that concludes the presentation.
Great, thank you, Director Chamberlain. You're welcome to come back up here. I will take a mover and seconder for the report and then take questions and comments about the report and the presentation. Moved by Councillor Dart, seconded by Councillor Burrows. Just as Director Chamberlain comes to the front here, I do want to give special thanks to staff, those that are at the front of the room, but also those in attendance in the gallery this evening as well, for all your efforts and contributions to this very comprehensive capital budget. Particular interest to me is the way in which the backlog of projects has been addressed over the years, and we're making significant improvement on that front, which is greatly appreciated, and thank you. So we do have a speakers list, and happy to take questions or comments to either the presentation or the report. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'm looking at the list of capital projects in our binder, and just a couple of questions. It seems like an awful lot of them are probably just placeholders. They're not the real project cost, and I'm wondering, do we have a real project cost, or are we still just using placeholders?
Through the chair, there, as I noted, there's 185 projects. 175 of them, there are full business cases in the budget binder to support the expenditure, and so we would propose that the 178 be initiated.
No, I'm not clear. I think what I was trying to say is there a line that shows the total cost? This will be just initiating in some cases. So the business case is not this, say, 200,000. The business case is the project, and we're initiating in 2018. Isn't that correct?
Through the chair, not exactly. We would initiate 178 of the projects concurrent with the budget approval, because the initiation report is replaced with the detailed business case which you're provided with in the binder.
Right.
There would be only 7 that would be deferred to be initiated at another date and initiated when those business cases come forward.
Okay, and so these are the total costs for these projects?
Correct.
Rounded off to even 200,000 per project? Thank you. The other one is I'm trying to understand the sewage lagoons in Niagara Lake, the decommissioning. There's supposed to be $10 million set aside. I guess it's set aside somewhere else, not in our capital project.
Commissioner Tripp, can you
Through
assist?
through you, Chair, it's identified in 2019 projection.
It's identified in the 2019 projection, Councillor Burrows.
Okay. Oh, thank you. And you mentioned in your presentation that during the year you'll be potentially repurposing as we go through the year any funds that may become available. Is this the $1 million limit that our CAO, where's our CAO? There he is, sorry. That's the authority that under that agreement, which we have approved, you don't have to come back to council with these changes?
Through the chair, what we were proposing was to look at the forecast, so the 2019 and 9-year forecast, to look at reprioritizing those projects to better align them with the funding available as well as the asset management plan. The 2018 budget would be as proposed, except for should funding come available as a result of previously approved projects that we could substitute. We would certainly do that.
Okay, and you promise not to take the 2019 decommissioning of the sewer lagoons out of 2019. Is that a promise? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The motion on the floor, you said, had to do with approve this report. So I gather the motion then on the floor is to approve in principle the capital budget, and approve, item 2 was approve in principle, well, that's not in principle, but to approve the list of projects summarized in Appendix 2. Is that, so we approve this tonight, we have approved the list of projects in Appendix 2.
So with final approval, when the 2018 budget is approved, ideally December 7th. So committee would recommend to council, which would come ideally December 7th. So in essence, yes, but if you have a sober second thought, there's still an opportunity to make adjustments up to December 7th.
Okay, so there's quite a list here in Appendix 2, and quite a number of projects, and if we pass this tonight, it would take a little extra effort on December 7th to make any changes to this list.
Well, it wouldn't take reconsideration yet, so if now is the time, in essence, if you want to make or talk about some suggestions or changes, now would be the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you. The presentation then, it was mentioned that we have 189 million in the request. The original 263 was not affordable because it would require too much additional levy. For example, what would an extra $1 million in levy allow us to do on this request? Would it bump us up by just $1 million or $10 million? How would that work? If we had another $1 million to close that gap between 189 and 263.
Thank you. Through the chair, the rough math is that for every 1% in levy, you can generate about just under $3.5 million worth of spending. Levy is one consideration that maxed out the budget. The other consideration is we do debt ceiling calculations of what we can afford from debt that's issued and authorized also. So we also factor that in. So we would suggest any additions to this program would not be done through debt, but be done through levy or rate.
Okay, so thank you. What does 1% represent in dollars? 1% of the levy?
Approximately $3.5 million.
3.5 million.
3.3 million.
So you're saying $3.5 million would only generate $3.5 million worth of work. I understood that if we were able to put a certain percentage in, then we could leverage more work than the cash we put in.
Thank you. Through the chair, that's correct. If you had put some money in and use that to pay the principal and interest for borrowing, but we're essentially maxed out on the amount we can borrow this year. So any additional money would just be strict for capital use only because we can't leverage more debt.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to the list, the one I ask about often is the notion of the rail on apron or the rail on dockside in Port Colborne for the Seaway opportunities there. What appendix does that show up on, or is it on the list at all anymore?
Through the chair, I'm going to direct the rail question in Port Colborne to Commissioner Tripp, but I don't believe it's in the existing list.
Apologize, Chair, if you could repeat the question.
We've talked about the opportunities presented by building the rail alongside the dock in Port Colborne at Concession 2, and that's been on our list and off our list, and I know it's not on Appendix 2 list. Is it anywhere on any list at this point?
Through you, Chair, no, it's not. It's a follow-up from the Transportation Master Plan. There was actually verbiage added to it, committing to further review the rail on apron, which I didn't have any background or continuity on. I can't speak to how it existed in previous budgets, but there needs to be further work in terms of as we look forward and refine the projections. It's not on 18, and the department's not in a position right now to placehold it in subsequent years, but we committed through the Transportation Master Plan to do the work necessary to find its place.
Okay, so we can work on that next year through the master plan and hopefully get it there someday. Okay, that's my questions for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Sendzik?
Thank you, Chair, and as well, thank you for the presentation that we just had. Just a couple of questions. One is On the growth of 27 million that has been allocated, the list that was in the written report, and I'm going to take it that that is the extensive list, which talks about the different roads that are going to be upgraded. So it needs to need clarification on that. So I'm trying to find the page on it. Oh, it's on, I guess it'd be page 4. So it's also Grimsby Water Main, Martindale Road reconstruction. I'm specifically asking about Martindale reconstruction. Why would that be under the growth cost?
Commissioner Tripp?
Through you, Chair, I don't believe that that list is intended to be inclusive. It just highlights some of the bigger examples that are funded through development charges. And Martindale Road, to the question, is almost entirely funded through development charges as a capacity improvement project.
Okay, so through the chair, I'm just asking a question just on the growth part. My interpretation of the growth part of this budget is to support growth in the communities. This seems to be a corridor that's not going to undergo a significant amount of growth, and yet it's being allocated to this area. We've had discussions previously about a part of the capital budget that would be assigned to growth areas and areas that we see growing. This one seems to be more of it's a continuation of an existing services that are there. We don't have any high rises that are going up to support that area at this point in time. So I'm just trying to get an understanding of the definition of growth.
Thanks for the question. Director?
Through the chair, the Martindale Road extension is part of the St. Catharines Secondary Plan area, which is to provide for, there is an identification of a growth in that neighborhood south of that area that would facilitate that growth and access of that neighborhood to the QEW. There's a potential of 1,900 people and 2,300 jobs identified in that secondary plan, which is growth in that community, and it's also part of the linkages to the Via Rail Station and the Metrolinx, which is to, there's the growth component associated with the transit function.
So through the chair, and I'm support. I love the fact that you're investing in our community. I guess my concern is that when you're ascribing the word growth, I'm associating it with the outward growth of urban areas, or looking at the growth of Welland, or looking at the growth of Fort Erie, and not necessarily the growth in St. Catharines. So this, to me, would be an infrastructure project that I think we would do already, not really looking for growth. The roads are going to be nominally a little bit more wider. We're putting in some street lights, putting in some stop signs, and yet all of the development charges are being allocated to this. So I'm just, again, trying to get my head around how we're doing this. And this is a St. Catharines project, so I should be rah, 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 and I am. Forgive me for not being, but trying to understand the growth part of it.
So we'll, it harkens back to the development chart discussion, which we're going to talk about, I believe, next week. I've also noticed in that list of projects, it's not just growth projects, and maybe that's where some of this is coming from. Commissioner Tripp had a response, though.
If I could, through chair, to the committee for help with context, in using this specific example, I would acknowledge that directly abutting the corridor, it's pretty well built out, but that corridor is a part of a bigger system, the West St. Catharines, and actually has linkages and relationships with the GO secondary plan. So there's the build out of the area on the other side of the 406, as well as the GO implementation and the role that this particular corridor has in facilitating that growth. That's sort of the rationale. In terms of the envisioned built form, it's largely the center turn lane, which facilitates turning movements and increases the capacity through the corridor. So it's, hopefully that helps. It's just through the Transportation Master Plan work, it's identified as a key corridor as part of a system to support growth in that general area.
Okay. I'll look for further clarification on that. In terms of, there's an allocation in the budget for an expansion here at the grounds of the region. I think it's about a $6 million investment. Could I get a feedback? Is that an immediate growth that you're looking to invest in there? Is this something that can be allocated further down the road?
Commissioner Mostacci, can you assist on that one?
Actually, no.
Oh, Commissioner Tripp, sorry.
Through your chair, it's actually $6 million in water and $6 million in wastewater, a total of 12. And it's being recommended deferred to 2019.
So
I
I'm
believe.
sorry for clarification. Are we talking about the plaza up here, the regional plaza? Is that what you're?
Sorry.
Mr. Mustacci, all right.
In terms of background, what we're asking for is the $1.2 million for Phase 2 of the International Plaza.
So in the budget, it's 6 million total. So I'm just wondering, is that something that can be done?
Yes, sorry through you, Chair. The way the International Plaza the total headquarters landscape master plan is set out is that each stage is independent and can stand alone. So we've set it out so that it can be implemented over multiple years, and it's completely at the discretion of council to fund each phase as it sees fit. As you know, a portion of it was approved in 2017, and we're asking for funding for Phase 2 in 2018, but that's independent of what was previously approved.
Okay, so through the chair, is there an opportunity to make an amendment to remove that for 2018 as a non-essential item?
Yes,
Again, don't mean to pick on any projects. It's just if we're looking to ensure that we've got the capital dollars going to the essential capital, and we saw the gaps that are being created, I just want to make sure that we're actually applying it to the gap. And if I can make that amendment that is removed at the appropriate time, I'd appreciate that.
Sure,
Mr. Chair.
I think we can take that now. So if clerks get an understanding of that particular line item being removed. And is there a seconder for that amendment? Seconded by Councillor Augustine. Any questions or comments to that amendment?
Can we get the amendment on the screen, sir?
Okay, we'll get it on the screen. In the meantime, Councillor Volpatti on the amendment. All right. Councillor Volpatti on the amendment.
Microphone. Oh, thank you. I wanted the amount in there, so it's there now. I want to speak against the amendment. Thank you, Chair. The International Plaza portion of this whole campus master plan is a very important part of our goals for the 2021 Summer Games. And these phases, although they can be funded separately, they have to be done consecutively. And I think it would be a big mistake to remove this 1.2 million now. Certainly it's not growth, so it wasn't in the DCs, but it's a beautification issue of this whole corner, not only the regional corner, but the connections with Brock, et cetera. We have this university that we're not taking advantage of in any of our plans, and I hope that the committee would see fit to vote against this amendment and to approve the 1.2 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Chair Caslin on the amendment.
Thank you. And, you know, although I do appreciate every opportunity to save a dollar to take it off the tax levy, I need to stop and think about what's happening right now with Sir Isaac Brock Way and the changes that are taking place there in line for the 2021 games and what we're trying to do there, as well as the construction that's taking place on the underpass, the overpass around the 406. So really, by delaying this, we're really disconnecting the two projects, and we're going to be in a construction phase for an extended period of time, probably right through the 2021 games. So I'm not sure that this particular plan makes the best sense, simply because the timing is important for other aspects and the roll down effect. And I think I'd like to hear from our staff on, you know, am I correct in assuming that, or are there other moving parts?
Commissioner?
Through you, Chair Barrick. As I mentioned, we strategically identified each phase as standalones, but there is an association. So certainly if we go ahead with phase one, which is the hard surface plaza area, you don't want to wait too long to do phase two, because you do lose the momentum. And that's why we brought it forward in 2018 as a budget request, recognizing that we have to go through the design process, and we want to follow up phase one with phase two so that the whole frontage of the regional headquarters is taken care of, and we can put on the best face possible for the Canada Games.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And obviously, I would expect that Brock University would not take kindly to what we're trying to do here by delaying it. You saw what they had us do on the Merrittville Highway section with the roads and the paved pathway. I think this would probably be something that, I mean, part of the build here with the landscape master plan was so that students could access through the regional property over to the lofts and the other housing developments that are taking place behind us here. By delaying this, I think we're just creating another problem for ourselves down the road.
Okay, thank you. I see there's a couple more speakers. This ideally is a yes or no, a vote yes or no to this, so I don't want to get too much detail, recognizing this is a working committee, but Councillor Quirk?
Thank you, Chair. It's more of a general question before I speak specifically to this, but I noticed on Appendix 2 it talks about certain projects funded from reserves. The reserves that are identified, we put aside our council-approved capital reserve last year, the 1% fund that we had. Has any of that funding been identified to spend on any of the projects on that list currently? Because that was supposed to be specifically identified as councillor-approved funding.
Through the chair, I believe it's Appendix 5 to the report.
So I apologize if I didn't see it.
We have identified specifically that 2017 contribution, as well as the 1% 2018 contribution, be dedicated to funding the regional share of growth-related projects so that we can advance a number of growth-related projects, and those are listed in Appendix 5. And so that reserve that's listed there, that is entirely the amount from the 1% infrastructure deficit reduction reserve.
So, and I see that now. I didn't see it identified specifically as that particular reserve. I'm sorry if I missed it in the report. So that's already, again, been spoken for in this appendix now. Okay, I'm not in favor of taking this out of the budget at this time. I think we can always look at alternative funding sources and where we want to bring the funding for specific projects like that for the for HQ. But I think it's important that this master plan be moved forward, so it is there in time for the 2021 Summer Games, and as well as improving the appearance and welcoming nature of our headquarters.
Thank you. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at this from the perspective of a project that's been progressing over a number of years, and we're now at the first stage, and 1.2 million is recommended here. But I'm also recalling 1.6 million that we are suggesting we would give to Niagara College, which is a provincial community college that we have no obligation or no duty to fund. That's a provincial project. This is a regional road, regional headquarters, regional project that mats up with a regional priority for 2021. So I'd ask for a little bit of perspective. Where's the 1.6 million for Niagara College going to come from? When we're arguing about 1.2 million for a regional project on a regional facility. So in this whole picture, the 1.6 million for Niagara College, where's that coming? Is it going to be in the operating budget as opposed to the capital budget?
Thank you. Through the chair, we have 600,000 coming from the capital reserve, and then the rest we put into our operating budget. However, staff's only recommending at this point in time 1.4 million, which Niagara College would also be happy with. So that though they requested 1.6, we could fund 1.4. And part of that funding, the $200,000 per year that would come subsequent, comes from another program that we were funding that falls off our commitment, and now we're just repurposing that commitment to that program.
Well, what was the motion we passed the other night? I thought it was 1.6, referred to operating budget consideration. So you're going to come back to us with this new funding proposal at that point? Well, okay, from still looking at, we're going to have to get 1.6 somehow, somewhere. I don't want to support the Niagara College one. I do want to support this one because this is our business sticking to our knitting, and I don't really want to short circuit this project and spend 1.6 million on a provincial community college project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Nunziata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to belabor the point. You know, this council has dedicated $500,000 towards public realms investment, and here 1.2 million for our own facility. I don't see the problem by keeping this in the budget. It's the commitment that we've made, not only to our lower tier municipalities, to be more respectful and more responsible with respect to our regional infrastructure in all our lower tier municipalities. Here we're asking for a smaller investment in our public realms, in our democratic institutions. So I have no problem leaving this in the budget. I will be voting against the amendment.
Thank you. Councilor Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I seconded the amendment because I think it's important to have the discussion first off. And I can understand why we would want to think about this and do this in relation to the Canada Summer Games. But a couple of things. First off, it's not just 1.2 million. The total project is $6.8 million for this park. That's a big, expensive park, and I think it's something that we definitely should think about and have the plan for. The second point is that you know, Chair Caslin talked about the reconstruction on Sir Isaac Brock Way. You know, that's not going to happen till later in the year. It won't be done, etc. So we're going to have kind of all these muddy projects and everything. It would make sense to do it. You don't do the landscaping of the house while the house is still, you know, you put the driveway in and all that. You do the landscaping later, which is what this is. So, you know, I seconded it with the understanding that it would be referred essentially to the 2019 budget, which then it can make sense and be put in, etc. There's enough money to develop the plan, make it all ready, get those costings available, and then do that for 2019 and 2020. So that's why I'm in favor of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. So thanks for that clarity. Just so the intent of the movers of the amendment isn't to remove the project in perpetuity. It's basically to refer to 2019. So I hope councilors will keep that in mind when voting. Councilor Volpatti?
2019 looks really bad from here, Chair. I can just see what's going to happen with that.
Okay, so you've also requested a recorded vote on the amendment?
I did.
Look to the clerk to call the vote when ready. Councilor Rigby. Okay, thank you. So thanks for that. We'll put the main motion back on the screen. Councillor Senzig, you still have the floor.
Just a couple more questions, and one of the questions, Councillor Nunziata was talking about the public realm, which I completely appreciate. In this capital budget, where do we have trees? Do we have trees allocated anywhere in this capital budget? Because just wondering where that line item would be.
Through the chair, we do not have trees in our capital budget, I guess due to the nature of the type of roads. There is some investment in the operating budget related to the removal and replacement of the Emerald Ash Borer, but there's nothing in the capital project. I believe we're ramping up the program and looking for some money in 2018.
That's what I was looking for, operational capital.
Through your chair, if I could just supplement, agreed, there's no discrete program for the placement of trees. Part of it is covered through operating associated with removals. Where they are, I think answering, going to the question of the councillor, in our capital projects, although it's not discretely identified, we have adopted a program of at least 2-for-1 replacement as we do road reconstructions. It's not necessarily an exact science, but through our road reconstruction projects, we look for all opportunities to introduce trees along the street corridor.
So through the chair, in the city of St. Catharines, trees are considered a capital investment. They're under our capital budget because they are green infrastructure. They do last for 50 years, many of them, unless there's a disease like the emerald ash. I would expect hopefully further future consideration that we'd see trees as part of the infrastructure that we're building. And I would say to date, again, going back to what Councillor Nunziata was talking about with the public space, the region has not done a good job of creating that green space through trees, especially on Niagara Street in St. Catharines, which was recently redone by the region. No trees were replaced, and that's a bit of an embarrassment. So hopefully we'll see in the budget at some point, and maybe not this year, because clearly we're going to put 1.2 million into a park, but I'd like to see other public spaces that are on the roadways of the regional roads have green spaces so that all of our residents living throughout the region will have an opportunity to appreciate the green realm that abuts our owned roadways. I'm not seeing that. So the last question I'll have is, if you go to the capital budget on water, wastewater, it's a simple question. If we can go to the graph, and I think it's page 7, and then water, it's the capital forecasting for the future.
Is that within the presentation, Councillor?
Yeah, from Ms. Chamberlain did the presentation, and I believe it's page 10. And it's a simple question, and just looking at the graph, which starts 2017 and shows a precipitous drop on the water reserves, can someone answer the question through chair, how long it took us to get those reserves built up?
Director?
Through the chair, we have been, the region has adopted a pay-as-you-go strategy, and we're up to about $40 million a year contribution. It's almost a 50-50 split, and the water reserve and the wastewater reserve. So a $40 million balance in the wastewater reserve would have been about 2 years worth of reserve contributions. However, it's not a one-for-one. We don't all put it in there. It's been accumulated over time and then coming down over time. And the wastewater starting at 70 million, so that's 3.5 years worth of contributions.
So through the chair, I just want to get an understanding. So before that, the reserves were at 0?
No, through the chair, that's what I was trying to explain. They would have accumulated over a period of time,
So
and
I'm
there's
asking how long
pluses and
would that
minuses. We'd have to go back and look at how long the actual contribution to the reserve did increase for a number of years, but due to guidance restraint over the last number of years, it stayed steady. So it's generally has been coming down, and so this is a downward trend overall for those two reserves, but we'd have to go back and look at when it started, that downward trend.
So if I could, through the chair, if I could see that information, because where I'm trying to go with this is that we've done some significant investments on our water, wastewater, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Niagara Falls, Welland. It would seem to be that we prepared for that investment, which would be a significant amount of capital that would come out. It would then drop, naturally, it should drop because we've made significant investments on the infrastructure. And then is the horizon a 20-year horizon to get it back up to where we're going to need to make massive investments back in it? Or is it a 10-year horizon, or is it a 5-year? Because this is, to me, like chicken little, the sky's falling and, oh, this is really, really dangerous. But this could be the natural ebb and flow of capital investments of this nature, where we build up the reserve and then it comes out because we have major projects, and then it takes us 15 years to build it back up again. So I just need clarity on, is this really a doom and gloom chart?
Through the chair, I don't want to use the term doom and gloom, but what this does is once we are depleted, once those reserves are at balance, we are confined without any other sources of funding other than reserves, and given that we're at our 60% limit in our debt, we would be limited to funding water and wastewater infrastructure to the extent of that operating budget transfer. So that's $40 million in, $40 million out. That would be the extent of it, and that is much lower than that represents a $70 million gap each year relative to the asset management plan. So $40 million would be all that's allocated, and $40 million would be all that we could spend each year. And it would otherwise, and that's reflective of this trend of staying flat into the unforeseeable future.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Just to follow up to the councillor's information request, can we get this line chart retroactive? I see it's as of 2017, but I think, and rightly so, there's a request made to see 10, 20 years back, something like that. Thank you. Councillor Campion?
Thanks, Chair. I just have a question, semi-procedural. I'm wondering if there's anything here, if we approve the capital budget tonight, and then we go back and we're dealing with our DC bylaw, and we made a decision to reduce the rates in the DC bylaw, and we didn't want it to affect the levy. Is there anything in here that would tie our hands as far as reducing our projected capital expenditures that our DC bylaw is based on?
Go ahead, Director.
Through the chair, the 2018 budget use of development charges is reliant on balances that already exist. It's the future forecast, which relies on $54 million on average per year. We're only collecting about $25 million per year based on the current bylaw.
So to answer your question, not for this 2018 budget.
We would be more concerned with the future forecast, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Chair Caslin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things, a couple of observations that I wanted to point out first that I get a lot of questions on. And one is about the bike lanes on Lakeshore Road in Niagara Lake finally entering into the forecast. And I know it's a significant safety concern for all those in Niagara Lake, and it's been brought up a number of different times. I've ridden it myself, and I know that the dangers that exist there, so I appreciate that. Second is the rehab of Martindale Road, the QEW to 4th reconstruction. I know it's a significant amount of money, but if you're one of those people in St. Catharines that use that section of road, you know how congested it is and how difficult it is to navigate during the rush hour periods. We never used to have a rush hour, now we do. My question around that is the 3rd and 3rd 406 intersection. Is there anything that's being contemplated for the 3rd and 3rd 406 interchange?
Commissioner?
Through you, Chair, at this point in time, no. It was identified, or I guess reconfirmed as a priority through Transportation Master Plan. It's something that's going to be evaluated forward and likely find a placeholder in the forecast. We're just not at the point right now to target exactly when that would be.
Thank you. I understand that we kicked it down the road. We can't kick it down the road much further. It's becoming a problem. If we ever lose the 4th Avenue 406 interchange, there will be significant congestion in the west end of St. Catharines, and something that this would avoid if we got this on the radar. I also wanted to ask, Mr. Chair, about the headquarters generator for almost $2 million. Can we talk about that? Can I get a little bit more explanation on the $2 million generator replacement?
Through the Through the chair, I'll start, and I'm going to ask Director Clucky to come down, as she has more technical expertise than that. The generator itself, we are actually on a rental generator at this point in time that sits outside my office on the grass. So the generator requires replacement, and it's a more complex design because of the data center coming in also, and so the cost has increased because of the demand on the building. And this building, for lack of a better term, we don't have a lot of redundancy in this building, and if anything goes down at this point in time, we would have significant constraint of operations. But I'm going to let Director Clucky fill in the technical details.
Through the chair. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so it's actually replacing two generators. One is from 1982, so it's quite old. The other one is from 2006, but we are currently completely at capacity. So as we grow, we are challenged to meet those needs. As well, we're not, it's grandfathered, but it's not meeting current compliance requirements. So we do have a need to replace both of those units. We did a feasibility study, so we looked at various options, and the option that is presented is the one that we think will be best. It's much like the police headquarters, where you have multiple gen sets which provide redundancy and which only come online when needed.
Maybe I could just ask a question a little further. What do we have at headquarters that needs a $2 million generator backup?
Director?
Through the chair. Well, one, we're the emergency operations center here. Two, we have our IT data center here, which has all of our, obviously, IT infrastructure. So it is imperative that we have that. In addition to that, we are required to have a generator to support us if anything goes down, and it's a relatively large facility.
Dr. Yeager, would like to add?
Thank you very much for being recognized, Chair. You also have up to $12 million of vaccine at varying times of the year. And it is extremely challenging for us to move that by maintaining temperature control if there's a failure.
Okay. I appreciate the answers. I just want to make sure that we've explored all the options for backup power supplies, including redundant supplies from Hydro One, UPS, and battery backups if we haven't done so. I want to make sure that we've exhausted all opportunities before we spend $2 million. Have we?
Okay.
Have we? Oh.
Through the chair, yes. We have investigated that. We also have UPS. We need both. We need to be able to bridge to the genset because there is that short period of time. And as Dr. Yeager mentioned, it is imperative that we manage that. So we have investigated, and we will continue to investigate. A portion of that is to review with the consultant to make sure that we have the appropriate design. What we've done so far is feasibilities, selected one based on that. But in 2018, we would refine that, do the specs, make sure that we've accounted for all those things you just mentioned, and construct.
Okay, great answer. I appreciate that. But by the way, a 1982 vintage, there's nothing wrong with a 1982 vintage. I'm a 1960 vintage. Last question, Mr. Chair. To do with the IT equipment in the NRPS budget, and I know we talked about it today at police budget, I'm going to ask if staff can look at using debt or financing substitution instead of police reserves for the NRPS IT equipment projects at $1.1 million. And if possible, adjust the final capital budget to reflect this change. Is that possible?
Commissioner?
Through the chair, we'll take that away and see if we can adjust that.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Height.
Yes, through to staff. You made a comment about the 60% level. That is, am I reading is fairly critical for our lending for Standard & Poor? And that would affect then all the lower municipalities as well as the region if we went below? Or if we raised the level and we hurt our standing?
Thank you. Through the chair, that's correct. That's our estimate. S&P never fully discloses exactly how they calculate it, but we take our best guess at it. And If we exceed that level, we run the risk of a downgrade, which would increase our cost for borrowing. It doesn't mean we can't borrow more, it just means our cost would increase at that point in time.
And obviously, because we borrow for the cities, their costs would go up as well.
That is correct.
Okay, so it's critical, the DC charges, as we're hearing 219, we're looking down the road, and it's not doom and gloom, but there are issues if we're looking the next 5 years by not contributing, collecting enough money, keeping some in reserves today, and generating enough revenue. Is that not correct?
Thank you through the chair. Yeah, again, don't want to use doom and gloom. What I would say is our financial flexibility continues to decrease as we use more reserves and more debt. We have a net debt position that is continuing to increase. As you have more debt, you have less flexibility. Okay. So,
one of the graphs spoke to water and wastewater and the problems that we're having there. Only a few weeks ago, we had to go into the reserves because I assume most individuals in their homes are trying to conserve water, which there are fixed rates, and therefore the cost still is there. Cost per gallon, per meter, whatever measurement we have goes up. We still need that money. Should we not be looking at higher increases in the water and wastewater because we know the huge costs that we're looking at over the next few years to buffer, to help that reserve fund? So there's enough money to pay for Niagara Lake, the new Niagara Falls, Grimsby, et cetera?
Thank you. Through the chair, the budget increase that happened was because of emergency repairs. We did not have sufficient funds to deal with that. You are correct. The asset management plan requires increasing dollars to be spent so that we don't get those surprise repairs. And one of the options we are looking at, we would like to come back with options on that. It is our biggest infrastructure gap. Water and wastewater is by far our single biggest infrastructure gap when you look at what we are spending on replacing our assets and maintaining our assets to what we're supposed to. And what we need to do is come back with a strategy, whether it's increasing our fixed portion of it, increasing our rate, or some combination thereof, will be required to meet our asset management plan.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Burgess, as you're speaking about that, should we not be doing it now and not waiting for another year and addressing that issue now, getting that fixed rate higher, regardless of how much you use in your house? The fixed rate is $300 a year, whatever it is, and then therefore will help the costs across the board?
Thank you. Through the chair, that would be a decision at the rate meeting and when we discuss that, and that is a strategy that council can certainly adopt to smooth out the requirements. In the presentation, Director Chamberlain did give some, we weren't calling them options, but just for the breadth of, so that you understood the total concept of how much would be required, those three options that were there. So to deal with the backlog of the capital projects and to deal with the getting us up to the required amount of investment we should be making each year into it, it was, I don't know, it was on, $77 million what's required per year to maintain what we have in the ground today. We're not close to that, and I don't have the presentation in front of me, but I believe option 2 was a 10% rate increase per year to accomplish that.
Now, not back to doom and gloom, but over the next 10 years, water and wastewater, are we looking at over $1 billion? Is that what I'm led to believe?
It'd be, to get up to that, yeah, it's $730 million approximately. But just to be clear, that is just for our existing assets, not any new growth assets on top of that.
That has nothing to do with the growth aspect.
Has nothing to do with the growth aspect. That has only to do with what we are existing. And that's why we've changed the presentation before you, to be very clear on what are we spending on our existing assets, what we're spending on our growth assets, and what we're spending on new programs or enhancements to programs, to make it, as crystal clear as where we're putting those monies.
Okay. Through to staff, and I'm not sure who wants to answer this. I thought I'd heard, but I haven't found it yet, money being spent on the council chambers, that there was money being allocated to do some work here that is a fairly new chambers. Where is that in the budget, or how much is it?
Thank you. Through the chair, that was presented at Corporate Services Committee when we looked at each of the committees, we presented all the capital requests, and at each one, we recommended which ones we would defer or delete. That was one of the ones that was deleted or deferred.
Good.
So there is no, that is not in the budget.
Okay, and that isn't critical, but this is what I'm gonna bring up now. Every year, when we come to roads, there's always an argument we aren't spending enough on roads. And I'm looking at page 3 of the report, and we're looking at the condition index going from 72 down to 71, but we want to be at a target of 73. How much is required to bring it up to 72 to be at the same standard as this year? And how much required to reach the target of 73, which is critical? And I can recall halfway through the year, we took money out of the reserves just to put into the roads and the pavement infrastructure.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm going to start the answer, and I may defer to Commissioner Tripp. The road condition assessment is, when you're redeveloping roads, sometimes they're multi-year projects. And when we looked at our asset management plan, if you go back to the asset management plan, we're actually essentially spending what's required to maintain that asset within a couple $1 million. If you take that and compare that to water and wastewater, we're spending $73 million less than what's required on water and wastewater, and we're spending about what we need each year on roads. So just by putting a little bit more money into a roads program won't necessarily bump your index one year, because some of those road programs take multiple years. So I think I've delayed enough for Commissioner Tripp to get a better answer. But I think it's not just what you spend, but how long some of those programs take to get to your condition assessment up. But I'll pass it over to Commissioner Tripp.
Commissioner?
Through you, Chair, provide a little bit of clarification on that. So the origin of those numbers is through the asset management plan, which was information from us at the time. My suspicion, and this will be the subject of a report coming back to Public Works very soon, is it's not reflective of current state. It's not reflective of the investments we made in very recent years, the last 2 years, because we did a full analysis of our roads in the previous year, and I'm not 100% sure that proposed for 2018 is of 71 is accurate. But what I can indicate and commit to council is that we are planning to bring a fulsome update on what we referred to previously as the Pavement 101 that speaks to all the condition index of pavement very soon to council.
Through the staff, you said very soon, so will we see a dollar figure included in it if we want to bring it up to a better level? Because the residents know what the roads are like. They don't know what the water underground looks like, and they aren't as concerned as they are the roads. And if we hear complaints, it's about how bad some of the roads are in Fort Erie, Niagara Falls, St. Catharines, et cetera. I'm sure every city has them. So we'd like to see a dollar figure on it with that report if we could, to bring them up.
Through your chair, the answer is yes. You'll see updated information based on updated data, as well as was in previous reports, a couple of options in terms of what can be invested to change that number.
Okay. Last thing that I have an issue with, or a concern with, when we allocate our capital funds to Niagara Regional Housing, to Regional Police, to wherever, are they our assets, or do they become their assets after we spend our capital dollars on them?
Through the chair, Niagara Regional Police assets are our assets. Niagara Regional Housing assets, that's a bit more difficult story. There's some of those assets the province actually has a right to because they were transferred to us. Most of the title is in trust to Niagara Regional Housing.
Okay. Well, the reason I'm asking that question, over the last number of years, we have spent millions and millions with Niagara Regional Police with their radio system as an example. We've invested a lot of money. I've heard rumors, and I'm not sure, and too bad Councillor Sendzik and Councillor Diodati aren't here, but I've heard rumors that Niagara Regional Police are trying to subscribe their fire departments on an asset that I assume we own and I understand even Pelham Fire Department are being asked to buy radios to go on the radio system that is the NRP's radio system at a fee. Are we going to get the subscription rate back to us, or is NRP going to collect it if it's our asset? Because it doesn't show up in the budget anywhere. And it's too bad.
I'd have to come back to you. The only thing I know is that I know the emergency bands are changing to a different band, and there's a requirement for everyone to move over to that band. But other than that, I don't have any information.
The issue I'm saying is they're using the equipment that the regions bought, and then the revenue's going back possibly to Niagara Regional Police. We've invested the money. It's like double dipping, that we built the system for Niagara Regional Police, and now Niagara Regional Police are going to make money off our system and charge it to our local municipalities. I have a problem with that. So I leave that with you to get more information if you could.
Thanks. I saw Councillor Augustine want to respond, and you're next on the speakers list anyway, Councillor, so it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to try and find the report that we received at council at Pelham, where our fire chief alluded to this. My understanding was it was always the St. Catharines system, the upgrades that they're doing, that they've been delayed a year. It was to be done in 2018, and now they have a different system. So that's going to be, I think, 11 of the municipalities are through St. Catharines for fire, and Niagara Falls has their own system, and I think certainly Councillor Gale spoke about this at length. But my understanding, it was still that system. So I don't know if that helps the councillor. I'm trying to find the report from our fire chief, but that's my recollection, Mr. Chair. Is that correct?
I think.
Oh, maybe EMS. Yeah, maybe staff can answer that.
Chief Smith, welcome.
Thanks.
Through the chair, I'm not prepared to speak extensively on the issue, but I can confirm that that is correct. This is a replacement system that St. Catharines Fire has agreed to work with Niagara Regional Police on. The equipment is different. My understanding is that's a responsibility of each municipality, local municipality, to acquire that equipment, that it's not being provided by the Niagara Regional Police. That's my understanding, but I would suggest that a more comprehensive report is delivered by police if that is required.
Great, thank you, Chief. CEO?
Based on the inquiry, we'll reach out to the police chief and get some clarity on it and report back to this council.
Councillor Augustine?
Thanks. Just to follow up, I did find the update in the fire chief's report. It says that the St. Catharines Fire has secured pricing and finalized the details of delivering the services throughout the region, small R region. There will be a capital request for 2018, and Pelham will likely not change over until summer of 2018. So that's what I have, and we look forward to the information. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Now to my questions. Can we go to slide 11? Is that possible? I do have some questions. I think Councillor Height was asking some questions about this, but I'm confused because this particular slide shows that our debt ceiling is, it talks about it being at 465, yet two slides before, maybe this is the slide I needed it on, saying the authorized debt will go from 466 to 482 million. So why is it not showing 466 or 482?
Director?
On
slide 11.
Yeah. Through the chair, the 466 is the 465. It was just rounding. One number was rounded up, one number was rounded down. So that is the ceiling at 2017, and the 482 is the projected ceiling at 2018. We just flatlined it because it's subject to a number of different assumptions in terms of the growth rate of our revenue. So on the slide where we put the dash line, we just put the dash line at the more conservative number.
I was confused because it says authorized debt. It doesn't
It's all
say.
authorized, not
It doesn't say
issued.
debt ceiling, it doesn't, so maybe that can be clarified. Authorized debt to me means debt that's been, we've agreed to, we've approved it, et cetera, so, as opposed to debt ceiling. So thank you for that. Mr. Chair, I have a, maybe this isn't for here, maybe it's for the committee meeting where we're gonna deal with it, but I do have some questions about this, what's called the customer service strategy priority thing. There's some more detail in the binder here. I note that it has been reduced. Initially, it was put in the committee at 5 million, now it's down to 2.5 million. It talks about a phone system upgrades. It talks about a redesign of the regional website to leverage automated content management. This one was, I didn't understand this, Mr. Chair, because maybe it's because I'm thinking about Blade Runner or something like that, a new movie that's come out, but customer relationship management software to maintain customer, client, citizen, business profiles and activities across all service area. When I read profiles, I'm thinking profiling and Snowdlin and all that other stuff. So can we hear from Mr. Carter, what is this customer relationship management software?
Great, thanks. I know the general manager gave a bit of a teaser at the council meeting with more information to come this evening, so it's quite appropriate. Mr. Carter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, through to members of council. Given the direction and dialogue that took place last week, staff would be in support of deferring the 2.5 until staff reports back with further discussion with the LAMs, and also until we further dive into the engagement survey, internal and external, to determine our next steps for customer service. The purpose of some of this capital funds were really to piggyback off the exciting things that planning we're bringing forward with respect to renovating through the plaza, through the Brock District Plan. Also make this a really centric hub, I guess you would say, with respect to customer service, and really look at an overall vision of customer service, where we're going with a 311 call center, potentially with council strategic priorities, and also with some potential, I guess you would say, enhancements to our facilities, because there is a lot of data that we have collected to date that indicates that there is confusion sometimes from a resident's point of, from a call center, from a front counter experience. Overall, this was trying to identify funds for future needs, and this was a very aggressive approach from the GM's office, given the only 90 days that I've been employed here, was to come back with a strategic plan, or to actually assist council to accomplish one of their strategic plans. Yes.
I appreciate the information from Mr. Carter. And just a point of clarity, because it was 2.5 that was deferred, so is staff recommendation now, Mr. Chair, to defer the whole 5 million or not? I'm sorry.
General Manager?
Mr. Chair, through members of council, the 5 million was a starting point because there was funds that needed to be implemented when the budget process started. However, the goal was to ask for 2.5 million. Staff, given the dialogue and, as I said, the recommendations emanating from last meeting, staff will be in support of deferring the 2.5 million.
Okay.
Yes.
So maybe, Mr. Chair, when the time's appropriate, if I can move that amendment, I don't think it's in the initiation portion, but it should probably come out if that's what staff are now recommending based on the feedback from council. It sounds like it's, there's a lot there, and the general manager has talked about it, but I think it's something that maybe council needs to, understand a little bit more, and staff can flesh that out for us before we put it in the budget. Thank you very much.
Councillor, I'm happy to take the amendment now if you'd like, or if you have additional questions before you're complete.
Sure, I'll put the amendment on.
Okay.
I guess removing it from the budget for 2018.
Or is it deferring it to 2019? Or is it,
Yeah, something like that.
Deferring to 2019.
Deferring
Seconded by Councillor
consideration
Burrows.
of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments on that deferral of this line? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Mr. Chair.
Thanks.
I have a question, and I don't know, I'm asking it, it's about the Niagara Regional Police. Because of the discussion that we had at committee and council about the movement of the region changing its HR system, I was intrigued reading through the police portion of the binder that they are requested, or have requested $500,000 to, I think it's the same system that we currently have, this Kronos Workforce Timekeeper system. Is that the same system that we're trying to get out of? And they're putting money into it.
Through the chair, that's the time and attendance system that feeds into our HRIS system. So they kind of work as one, but they're two different systems. But the important part of that system is how they track time to pay the individuals, not the rest of the HR system.
What's the other one called? It starts with
PeopleSoft. And it's called PeopleSoft HRIS, Human Resource Information System.
Okay, so, Catalogic, that's what it was.
Catalogic is the provider, is a third-party provider that supports that system.
Perfect, thank you very much. Again, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask this cognizant that you are with the Police Services Board, and I'm just asking, but there are a couple of changes to the new headquarters. Maybe you can answer this, maybe staff. It's one of the last ones here. $180,000 for retrofitting of the front desk area with bullet-resistant glazing to allow for a return to a civilian staffing model. Does that mean, Mr. Chair, that initially, or there are police there and the movement is to change it to civilians at that desk? I don't know if you can answer that. I'm just asking for.
Through the chair, we want to be careful because there's human resource implications on that capital business case.
I apologize.
But the capital business case that is presented, I think, provides the information so that it allows for a different arrangement at the front of the building.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
With that,
Appreciate that.
as you know, the service will be here to talk to their budget, and I'm sure can answer all of those questions at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I just have a couple more here, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate Mayor Senzak spoke about the Martindale project. That did, once we started looking at it, it piqued my interest because the majority is to be paid by development charges, as we heard, Mr. Chair. 8.7 million of the $8.8 million project from development charges. And yet we heard that it's, so I'm not trying to pick on that particular project, I'm, again, just trying to understand this. But this is a resurfacing plus expansion. And so one would think, I guess when I think about development charges, I think of it something like an arena or a library or a fire hall that you can kind of think about. So if you add an extra bay to a fire hall and you build a new fire hall, you have one now you have two in the new one. Well, the second one, the second bay is allowable for development charges because that's for growth-related projects, et cetera. Similarly with the library, you add space on a library, or you replace the library, but existing taxpayers should pay for the kind of the square footage that's there. That's my layman's term in understanding development charges. In this case, there is a road expansion, but there's resurfacing, there's, I would imagine, some improvements, et cetera. So I guess what I'm asking is really how can 100%, basically 100%, except for the contribution from the city, 100% of this be funded by development charges when it's an expansion? I can see if you're expanding it from 2 to 4, the taxpayer should pay for the existing 2 refurbishment, and then the development charges pay for the additional 2. All that, just trying to understand how we got that allocation.
Oh, it's a great question, Councillor. Commissioner?
Through the chair, I'm going to start and then I'll refer to Commissioner Tripp. But there's always a calculation of benefit to existing that's undertaken by staff. And in some of these programs, you have to look at the total volume capacity that is being generated by the new expansion and the ability for it to be connected to other transit hubs. So staff does undertake a calculation to understand what is benefit to the existing and what is the cost for the new incremental growth development. But for the details, I'll pass that off to Commissioner Tripp.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair, so in this particular example, The need for the project is driven entirely by capacity improvement. Yes, it is one lane addition, which is a continuous center turn lane, as well as more specific intersection improvements at each of the main intersections. As I said, the genesis was not the condition of the road, therefore not upgrading the road because of existing condition. It's for capacity improvements, and actually not intended to be coy. It's very similar to the project in Pelham, which is Rice Road, where that is almost entirely DC funded as well for capacity associated with turning movements.
Perfect. That's why I was asking. I wanted to understand it, Mr. Chair, and again, not trying to pick on that particular project, just how the allegation occurred. So I appreciate the clarity. That helps. The final one, Mr. Chair, you'll be probably pleased, although 2 minutes was for helping about fire. I'm sorry, I don't understand the Thorold Stone east of Stanley Avenue piece. It's a considerable amount of money, $23 million. And I thought that a lot of that was done. It goes to the arena. This particular project here talks about site remediation, construction of an outlet, and I can't imagine, just me, but I can't imagine how much, I thought it was just curling around. So can we just hear, maybe the commissioner has talked about this before, can we just hear a little bit more about where this is going? Because the road has already been extended. What is this project that's going to take many years to complete?
Commissioner Tripp?
Through Chair, I apologize, I was trying to reference the key plan. So we completed almost half of this extension of road just earlier this year. It terminates currently temporarily at just past the entrance of the Gale Center. It's basically the completion, which is a little bit more than half. It turns around parallel to the tracks, or will likely do that. The preferred alternative identified in the environmental assessment was a significant turning circle at Victorian Bridge. Right now, the total estimated cost is an estimate at this point in time. The specific request for 2018 is to complete the detailed design for that, as well as embark on further analysis on the remediation required, as well as the property acquisition that will be required for that project. I was trying to reference the sheet. I believe the total amount includes cost sharing from other partners. A significant partner in this has been the City of Niagara Falls for municipal services as well.
Okay. Is there something more that we can have on this, Mr. Chair? Again, I said I didn't understand it. I'm not trying to condemn it. I just wanted to understand it more. And the numbers for funding it, I guess it's not here on the detailed sheet. I was just surprised at the amount, and I'm interested in the site remediation portion. I thought it was already remediated, so. Is that remediating the rest of the?
So just looking at the
And is there
business case-
something that the commissioner can send
Go ahead.
around to council about
Through you,
that?
Chair, I apologize, I don't have it at hand. It was the subject of the update report to Public Works Committee in the last 2 months. I will ensure that the council receives a copy of that. The specific answer to your question, yes, it requires remediation for the balance of the corridor.
Okay, thanks. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Councillor Volpatti?
He was interrupting me. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Reserve funds on page 6. Yes. Oh, right. What did I do without you? On page 6, please. Reserve funds is concerning to me that we are lower than provincial comparators, and we're going to be getting worse. Is it concerning only to me, or is it concerning to everyone and on staff?
Acting Commissioner?
Through the chair, it is concerning for staff. We present that information. There are different strategies, to be quite frank, that council can choose. And we provide that information so that they understand the total implications of both debt, reserves, and your spend. It is a balancing act that council has to make every time, and it's always tough decisions that council have to make. And we just want to, from staff's point of view, I think it's safe to say that we are looking at changing how we approach the future. What we've done in the past, we can't continue on in the future. Our runway, we do have a couple of years of runway. And in the levy budget that will be coming forward, one of the programs in there is a sustainability review that the staff would like to undertake to make sure that we have sustainability built into all our programs going forward. Because if we continue to erode reserves, that's not a sustainable strategy. So there is concern, but I wouldn't deem it as sky is falling. But I would deem it as you need to start to take action. Because at some point in time, the cliff will come at some point in time. So you have to make sure that you have a plan.
Right. And you say there are options. Are most of the options operational rather than in capital? Is that, I'm assuming that's what you're saying?
Not to overly simplify it, there is a few levers that council can pull. One is a revenue lever. One is a growth lever. You can choose not to invest in infrastructure for future growth and just take care of what you have. And the other one is look at operations, frankly, and saying, is everything that we're spending on delivering the highest value that we can, and maybe do we reallocate some of our efforts to other things that provide higher value to us. So the intent would be that I think going forward, staff will continue to look at how we're doing business. I will pick on Dr. Yeager tonight. She's undertaking a review in her program because there's stuff going on at the provincial level that says, listen, you have to look at what you're delivering and how you're delivering it. And that's one department, and we have to do that going forward in all our departments.
Right. So I'm going to assume then that as we go forward with this process, that you will be coming up with more options to address this issue.
We will come up with more options, and we'll see how well they're liked sometimes. So.
Okay, thank you. And my other question, I had a question on the District 2 retrofit, but that's already been asked. My last question, Mewburn Road, somewhere in here, and I don't remember exactly where it was, probably in the detailed stuff. There's a $500,000 set aside. What's the total regional contribution from Mewburn Road, and where is this $500,000 going to get us? Through you, Chair.
Commissioner?
Through Chair, the business case indicates there's a commitment of 500 this year to maintain our commitment to the partners in Niagara Falls as well as Niagara-on-the-Lake. We're now, Niagara-on-the-Lake has actually initiated the detailed design process, and we're going to verify final cost through that process and to be subject to subsequent reports to council.
So this $500,000 is sufficient to get this project started in 2018?
Substantially started, well underway, and perhaps the mayor would, just
No.
because the city of Niagara Falls is leading the process, perhaps the mayor would like to speak to it as well.
Right, because there's two communities that depend on this, Niagara-on-the-Lake and Niagara Falls, so please.
With a button like that, absolutely, sir.
Oh, that, I'm your favorite mayor, you're my favorite mayor button. I was just at a park opening, Mr. Chair, and a little girl made that for me.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I know it looks like my handwriting, but it's purely coincidental.
Very becoming, very becoming.
I did want to mention that on October the 26th, there's going to be a public information meeting at Fireman's Park at from 5 till 7 p.m. And there is one piece of property that the city needs to acquire for the approach, I guess, on the bridge. So we just determined today who the owner of that land is. We're going to reach out to that individual and hopefully we can acquire that piece and be on our way to have this bridge started and completed for next year. And then Niagara and the Lake will have their linkage. I know Councillor Burrows has been after this. We're going to name it the Burrows Bridge, by the way. So that's kind of where we're at right now, but it is moving forward, Councillor, and believe me, I've been speaking with our municipal works people on a regular basis to make sure this gets done pronto.
Thank you, I look forward to it. Thanks, Chair.
Great, thank you. Councillor Grenier.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to start my questioning with, it's on page 7 of the report. And under the debt strategy, it goes on to explain debt substitution, and I'm not sure that I understand this yet and what this really means and where we're going and how that actually applies to dollars we are using in this year's budget. So through you, if I'm going to ask that either Commissioner Burgess or Ms. Chamberlain review that for me.
Through the chair, the debt substitution is a strategy that allows us to put in the operating budget the adequate dollars to support the cost of financing that debt each year that the debt is approved. But because the timing of that issuance of that debt only occurs when the project is complete, there's variations in terms of what our actual cost is versus our budget. When there is a surplus of the budget over the actual cost, we use those dollars to actually reduce the amount of debt that we require. It's a strategy that Standard & Poor's has applauded. It's a great mitigation strategy for allowing us then to use debt for new projects where we are at this ceiling. We can do the substitution in the year. However, with this budget, what we've opted to do is rather than do the substitution in year, we've used that money to fund upfront some capital projects. And then we referred to it as a hybrid approach. So rather than do it as a one-off during the year, we were allowed to incur more capital expenditure by virtue of using those surplus dollars.
Okay, and I actually thought that that's what happened, Mr. Chairman, and is it possible that when this comes back, we can identify, or maybe you can even tell me where those 7 million, because it just says reserves. It's pretty non-descriptive in the list of roster of capital projects, how they're being funded. So is there an idea of what reserve that this money was forwarded to and then reassigned?
Through the chair, the 7 million would just form part of the overall capital levy allocation. It would go into the capital levy reserve and it would be part of the capital levy dollars. So it's part of, if you looked at any of the levy programs, it would just be part of that whole suite of capital projects. It's not specifically from the substitution. We use it for these projects. We add it to the 13 million available funding, which gives us a little bit more money to spend from the capital levy reserve.
It just pooled into the capital reserve and then reassigned as, okay.
Correct.
All right, so that's the good part. Okay, now, the other question, similar idea. When we assign debt to or pre-approve here, and before the credit facility is actually executed, sometimes actually we don't need all the money that we've approved. And for multi-year projects, is there any chance that some of that excess capacity can be used this year? Have we determined what that is yet, and can we use some of that this year, if we have any?
Through the chair, you're correct. We would not issue debt in excess of what we required. So what that does is it creates more room in our available debt. So we would consider that as part of our opportunity for the next year's capital program.
Have we identified that total or capacity in any way for at some point in this budget report?
Through the chair, it would just be part of the overall $52 million room that we have this year. To go back, we could go back and look and see on our closeouts. We do, when we close out the projects, we identify what surplus funding is available as a result of reserves that have been allocated. We don't specifically identify what hasn't been, but we can quantify that. We could bring that back for you.
Okay. Thank you. And I hope not to raise something that's going to anger people, but I'm trying to work this back from memory. 2011, maybe around that time, plus or minus a year, funds were borrowed by the region, but they were not assigned specifically to a capital project, and there was some kind of fund available. Is that fund still in existence, and is there any way that we can use that this year or figure out some kind of policy on how to draw down from that pool of money if it's still available?
Through the chair, one of the slides that's actually in the deck, in the slide deck, shows an increase in debt room in 2021 of about 75 million, and that relates to, it was in 2010, where there was a large debt authorized, and that was issued in advance of those projects being complete, but that debt was issued for a variety of different projects, and as it expires in 2021 and going forward, we are recycling that debt room.
That's the room. I'm trying to connect the dots and whether or not that money that we actually received through by borrowing was actually used for capital projects, or is it in some kind of investment vehicle that we could use now?
Yeah, through the chair, was fully deployed. It was just, they borrowed the money earlier. Normally, our standard practice now is the asset is built, it's completed, then we go out and borrow the money. I guess what they did previously for that one time for market conditions was they borrowed some money in advance, but was then deployed to the projects that it was initiated for.
So the fishing expedition I went on came up empty, right? This is what I was looking for.
But to answer your question, that money is coming off the books in 2020, and you'll see in the one presentation, our debt issuances goes to 75 million because we have that that amount of debt coming off the books.
The service capacity, or our ability to service debt will go up by predicated on what interest rates are compared to what they were at the time when we executed that. Okay, now the other question I have is with respect to our debt policy, and I'm not, I hope this doesn't come off as an indictment, but I'm not sure that I understand that there is any other than a necessity to do the projects, and this is where we can grab the money from. There's really no test with respect to the particular asset that's being constructed or repaired or maintained, and how some kind of decision tree works. And there might be at the staff level, but I'm not sure that I understand how that works. And I would like maybe that when we get through this, that we might want to be looking at that and with some kind of comprehensive work on the reserve policy that we're going to have a discussion about, because we're going to run out of that, and we need to actually have some kind of value judgments. For example, all road reconstruction should be debt financed, surfacing should have budget discipline, you know, those kind of ideals with respect to that. And I'm also of the mind that we should have a conversation about treating the rate supported budget on water and sewer much differently than we do with the levy, because we should probably be borrowing significantly more money on the rate support. The assets last anywhere from 50 years for a treatment plant to 100 years for a sewer pipe, and we should be looking at cash flowing that out for the benefit of those using it on that. And the levy budget, the assets have a very much more limited lifespan, and you work on that. So I don't think that we have that. You might be applying that, but I don't think that we're actually owning that moving forward on any conversation. You know, Mr. Burgess?
Thank you. Through the chair, we do attempt long-lived assets. We tend to borrow against. First, we look at whether there's a growth component, whether we can apply DCs to it. Long-lived assets, you can really only go to the market for 5-year, 10-year, 25 or 30-year debt. So you can't get 100-year debt anywhere. But so we do try to maximize our 20 to 30-year debt on long-lived assets. And that is kind of the pecking order. And then we look at, you know, reserves for shorter term assets on that. So I do agree with you, though. I think that discussion and that strategy that staff is deploying should be reviewed by council and go from there. The only problem is right now we do have, you know, we do have limited debt capacity or debt room at this point in time. So that would be part of the conversation that would be part of that financing strategy.
If I can, again, we need to check our language on that. The debt capacity is self-imposed, right? We have a very rigid limit on what we choose to go beyond. The legal capacity to borrow, we're probably less than a third of where we can be. I'm not suggesting we max out the opportunity, but the idea of us is being prudent and trying to find an affordability balance is there and laudable, but we're not, you know, the sheriff's not at the door looking at putting the locks on. It's you know, we got to watch how we say that, because I think that's how we get into the misunderstanding in the broader public when we start talking about our debt capacity and being up against the limit. We're not really in any danger other than our own concern about making room for the lower tier partners and ourselves to be able to go to the market for favorable rates.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would mostly agree with you. The one issue on limit 2 is debt servicing ability. And yes, we can borrow more, but that increases what we actually have to pay back. And to pay that back, you need the revenue to pay that back. So part of your limit is also determined by your levy and rate.
I understand the zero-sum game part of that on the capacity with guidance at 2% and cannibalizing some of that moving year over year. But I still believe we need to have sort of an adult conversation. You know, we have $7.2 billion of assets and, you know, maybe $300, $400 million in debt, the equivalent to having a $750,000 house with a $40,000 mortgage. Most people would take that deal tomorrow. So I think that we need to be very careful about how we present this and bundle it for public consumption. But I agree with you that we need to talk about all of that comprehensively rather than in silos like we have in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Rigby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few items. I was pleased to see that the structural rehab of the Burroughs Bridge at Mewburn Road is on the list, and he apparently is not paying attention to me. And just a question, J.R. Stort Bridge, is that the bridge on Martindale?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, so is this an additional $500,000 that is having to be spent on that?
Through your chair, that is money to start the design process for its replacement.
Or to replace the entire bridge?
Correct. Its condition is, it's been identified through our bridge condition surveys as requiring replacement. The repair work we did was on the embankment approach to it.
Yep.
We want to embark on the design process for the bridge replacement.
Thank you. The item of the NRPS district front desk brings to my mind about District 1. And I believe we still have money set aside to replace District 1. What is that amount that's sitting there now?
Through the chair, it's 13.38 million.
13?
13.
Okay. I've been going through that list, and then I've checked the 10-year capital process. The citizens of St. Catharines are waiting for a replacement of that facility. We keep hearing that it's going to cost us more to build than what we have budgeted for. What we don't seem to pay attention to is that the design work on that bridge has changed substantially because the facility in Niagara Falls was to be the only place where you have holding tanks. And now we're going to add holding tanks into the District 1 facility. Makes sense, but I could never understand why they didn't want them in the beginning. And I believe there's also a plan to put in the backup radio facility there. That was not included in that 13. So if we're going to build this bridge or this facility, we should be showing in our 10-year project process here an amount that is going to enable us to go ahead with doing those projects.
Through the chair, staff, regional staff and NRP staff have worked on a number of options to bring, to potentially bring that within the existing budget that's there. That information is going to be presented first to Police Committee, the options for it, and then it will come to Corporate Services Committee. So at this point in time, there's still the potential to build D1 within the budget guidance that was previously approved by Council. And we're hoping to bring that back to Corporate Services Committee and Council later this year.
And this is intended to keep it at that 13,000 million?
Yeah, it actually is grossed up a little bit more than that, but yes, to bring back the original budget, within the original budget. If you remember, the original budget was a combined budget with police headquarters and D1 combined. Sure. So there's a few dollars left over from police headquarters that's going to be combined to that. So we would bring it into the overall envelope, the overall envelope for that. But the options have to be first approved by the police board, and then that would come forward to here.
I believe that what we had set was an overall budget and set the maximum that could be spent at the headquarters. And that there was to be an amount left to do District 1. And in fact, in District 2 was included in the headquarters, right? And I don't see that if you're going to add things to what it was determined to be necessary in District 1, that you're going to add to that 13 million. It's going to cost us more than that. It should be in the at least the 10-year budget process. And if we got to wait 10 years to make everyone happy, then I guess that's what you're going to end up doing. But it seems to me that you need to be showing a potential for an additional cost for building a new headquarters or a district room.
Oh, sorry.
Through you, Chair, I'll start and refer to the acting commissioner. So what we've prepared for police services to consider are 4 options, and one option that we are recommending is within the budget that was set by this council and under the agreement. So one of the 3 options fits within that, but that option does consider future expansion. So to your point, we should be including that into any future growth.
Well, I guess I'll look forward to seeing what you're proposing, because I don't want to see the city of St. Catharines, who has a greater population, shortchanged on what should be in their district office. So unless we should have done what we did in the beginning, is just put them all in one place. Thank you.
Councilor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. I know our capital budget, we don't rely on any infrastructure funding or third funding that comes from the province or the federal government, but can we get an update of where we've been successful at receiving that funding from in the past, just as an information piece, so it gives us an idea of the sort of things that we can apply for?
Sure, through the chair. In some of the projects, we actually have identified in specific projects some additional funding. In our asset management plan, for the record, we do look at our historical win rate from securing senior ones, and that's netted off of what's required. But we can certainly take that away as an information request to present what we've officially obtained in the last year.
I'm only asking because it looks like we were only looking at about $17 million of external funding, and of that, 10 million is not coming from either of the other levels of government. So I'm just wondering if it's included somewhere else that I'm missing it.
Yeah, through the chair, we don't budget for anything that's not guaranteed, but we can do that, and sometimes that's how we have transfers back to capital reserve when we secure it. But a lot of the additional funding is either gas tax or other contribution that's known. But if it's known in our project, we do budget for it. That's there.
So, and can I just ask a question again, philosophically? So let's say we have a $20 million capital budget, and it's going to be $10 million in reserve funding and $10 million in debt funding, and it comes in under budget. Is the preference or the policy to reduce the reliance on debt or to reduce the reliance on the reserve? And is it actually sort of a standard policy we follow?
Through the chair, because we fund the reserve right away and we defer on the debt, we would generally reduce the amount of debt that was required for that project.
Okay, and is that standard practice? Or, I mean, if we've authorized a certain amount of debt, that obviously has some impact on our reserves on a go-forward basis where we've already authorized a certain level of debt that's already available to us to use.
Through the chair, this goes back to Councillor Grenier's question where we've authorized it and not used it. We can look at the last couple of years and see how often we've done that, but that would just be part of the opportunity that we would leverage in the subsequent year's budget if we didn't utilize the maximum that was authorized.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor D'Angelo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for staff presenting the capital budget. Several of my questions have been answered already, but I just wanted to get into maybe a bit of a specific for three projects that tie into each other. I'm looking at the budget binder book, and it's on page 34 of 89 in the transportation. It relates to Collier Road, Burley Hill, St. David's, and the St. David's interchange of the 406 and Highway 58. There's three projects that sort of tie into each other. One is the work that's being done around the interchange for a path. It's project, last three numbers are 497. And then, but the question I had was basically on page 34 of 89, because there isn't a day that goes by that I don't get asked about St. David's and what's happening with it. It was a road that was uploaded to the region quite a long time ago, and it took a while through the city to get it properly uploaded. And there's some work being done on it, but just so I have clarity, I know looking at this page here that $1,032,000 has been budgeted, and it talks about planning. 766,000 is planning, and then in 2018 capital budget, another $1 million is going into the planning. So it's $1.7 million in planning. Maybe if staff can give us an update of what's been spent, what's been done, and what remains to be done to complete the planning process, because I see in 219 is 3.5 million for this particular component for the construction. If they could just give me a bit of an update on that, because it's important for the residents of Thorold and South St. Catharines who use that.
Commissioner Tripp.
Through you, Chair, and I guess it's a good question in terms of it highlights sort of the probably typical sequence of a capital project, at least in the roads department. The initial amount was initiated to go through the EA process and initiate design. And we're actually nearing completion of the EA process and about to embark on detailed design. The $1 million is then for required property acquisition and utility relocations, which is intended to take place through 2018. And then the balance of 3.5 is an estimate right now for construction dollars, which is targeted at this point in 2019.
Okay, just supplement to that. That's excellent. Thank you for providing clarity on that. Just in terms, well, one of the things I want to stress is I see that the timeline is 18 and 19. The construction will happen. I just want to stress the importance of getting that done. It's been an area that's been under construction constantly, and it's a heavily traveled area because it's one of the major arteries for St. Catharines and Thorold, especially for busing that goes to the Brock hub and also here to the region. So whenever we can, I see it's being planned out. I think it's very important that staff stay on top of this to make sure it happens at the right time and it moves forward very quickly, and it, according to the schedule. And I know, I'm just giving a suggestion here that staff could take back, but again, it's heavily traveled during school season. So if construction were to happen, summertime would be a better time to get that going, because the traffic there is horrendous. The neighbors are asking for, there's a lot of accidents that happen on there. So anything that could expedite this and move it forward so it doesn't get delayed would really be appreciated. And I know the city of St. Catharines, I know unfortunately both mayors aren't here, they're also working on the other section of St. David's that's owned by both city of St. Catharines. So I know it's a joint project, but if we could clean up that corridor, it's one of the arteries to the downtown area. And with the expansion of student accommodations down there, it's very important that this artery gets unclogged as quickly as possible and also becomes safer. So I appreciate that. The only other question I had regarding this was there's a section of the Burley Hill one, and I'm just looking for the page that it's on. It's page 61 of 89, same section. It talks about a bit of construction work. Again, Burley Hill ties into this. It talks about a bit of construction happening in 2018 and then more construction in 2019. Maybe if staff could just give me an update why that can't be done in one particular year. And I know it talks about here in detail about the water main that's happening, but again, clarity so I could bring back to the residents would be very helpful. Commissioner?
Through you, Chair, yeah, it's actually not easily understood just on the surface. Right now there's two distinct projects. One is driven by the city of St. Catharines. It has to do with underground servicing, and we're going to be a cost-sharing partner, roughly from Warkdale down to Glendale. So again, largely driven by municipal improvements. There's a bigger project which goes from that point all the way up to the top, and it has to do with the platform of the road, potentially reconfiguring that platform. Right now there's a 3-lane section with a climbing lane, and we may be realigning that to better accommodate pedestrian activity, active transportation, and also storm drainage. So the allocation that's identified in 2018 is actually to initiate the EA process for that larger project. The city of St. Catharines is going forward with the portion at the bottom. We will be a stakeholder and a partner in that project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just looking at the cash flow. I think it might just be a typo because it talks about $2 million of cash flow in 2018. I think that should have been 200,000. That's why I was a little confused. I didn't know if the project was going to be moved forward to 218 because it shows 200,000 and then 1.8 in 2019.
Through your Chair, I believe that is a misprint, but we'll follow that up.
Okay, thank you.
It is intended for EA for 2018.
Okay, thank you. That answers my questions. And again, this is a major project, I know, and whatever staff can do to facilitate it happening quicker and working cooperatively so it all happens at once so that the area residents and those trying to transport through the area are least disrupted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And very quickly under the water section, page 52 of 60, it's the St. David standby pipe tank, which is going to be demolished, and that's great. But down in the second paragraph, the most important part is that the region will have completed the new pressure reducing valve by the end of this year, and certainly the residents will be pleased to hear about that. My question is, why is it in this section and not as a standalone? It doesn't relate to the standpipe tank, I don't believe. I think it's just the main line coming down with a reducing valve on it.
Commissioner Tripp?
Through your Chair, just for clarity, they are directly related.
They are,
The
okay.
standpipe is redundant now, but the PRV will be the appropriate implementation on the system.
Okay, and so just as a follow-up to that, they're not actually demolishing the tank till 2020, so we're still getting the reducing valve by the end of this year. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're going to be going forward with that as soon as possible.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks. That's great, Counselor, thank you. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you very much. Great work this evening, committee members. There are no consent items for information. Is there any other business? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Next meeting is November 2nd. Thank you.